Hey guys, welcome back. Today is day 52 and we are going to start to learn about factoring. So what is factoring? Factoring is the process of finding the factors of a polynomial. Okay, factoring is like reverse multiplication. Okay. We're trying to find out what polynomials were multiplied together to get the polynomial we are factoring. What's the first step to factoring? We want to find the greatest common factor. Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to do. And the greatest common factor is also known as the GCF. Okay, so when working with polynomials, the GCF can be both numbers and variables. So the number piece would be the coefficient, and then you have the variables. Okay, so our first example says to find the greatest common monomial factor of 30n cubed and 42n squared. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to break apart, all right, whoops, so it's n cubed, not n. So let's see, we've got 30n cubed and 42n squared. Okay, so I like to look at the coefficient piece first. So I've got the number 30. And to come up with my factors, I just like to start out with the number 1 and say, well, I know 1 is going to be a factor, 1 times 30. Okay, and then I kind of go down the list. Okay, 1, well, is 30 divisible by 2? Yes, it is. So 2 and 15. Is it divisible by 3? Yep, 3 and 10. Okay, 4, no. How about 5? Yep, 5 times 6. So there are my factors, 1, 2, 3, 5, and then going back up, 6, 10, 15, 30. So there are all my factors of 30. Okay, if I looked at the number 42, okay, again, I like to start with 1 times 42. It's even, so I know it's 2 times 21. 4 plus 2 is 6. I know it's divisible by 3, so it's 3 times 14. It's not divisible by 4 or 5. But it is divisible by 6, 6 times 7, okay? So there are my factors of 42. And see here they're listed, 30 and 42. The greatest common factor would be 6 in both of those, okay? Now looking at the variable piece, n cubed and n squared, all right? So if I thought of n cubed, that's 3 n's multiplied together, and n squared would be 2 n's multiplied together. So if you notice, the ones in common really are always the lowest exponent, okay? So if you looked at the exponents with the same base, it would be the lowest one. So the greatest common monomial factor of those two polynomials would be 6n squared, okay? All right, so the thing that's nice, actually Desmos graphing calculator can be used to help get the greatest common factor. So all you have to do is type in this function GCF, greatest common factor, and then list your coefficients in a comma separated list inside of parentheses, and it will come back and tell you the greatest common factor. So that might help you with the coefficient piece of coming up with the greatest common factor. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So my first example, I've got 12x plus 42y. Well, my greatest common factor would be actually just be a 6, okay, because the variable piece, there's nothing in common. We have an x and a y. So we're going to factor out a 6, all right? So when we factor it out, I'm going to give myself a little bit of space here. So I factored out a 6. Now it's like I want to do kind of a reverse distributive. Well, what can I multiply 6 by to get 12x? Well, all we're really doing is dividing both of these terms by 6. 12x divided by 6 would be 2x. And 42 divided by 6 would be 7, and it would be 7y. So we just factored out the greatest common monomial factor, that being 6. All right, with number 2, I've got 4 and 24. So my coefficient greatest common factor would be 4. And notice we've got x to the third and x to the third. X to the fourth and x to the third. Well, the lowest exponent here would be to the third power. So that's what they would have in common. Because think about it. You got x to the fourth, x to the third. You would have x to the third in common. So we're going to factor out 4x to the third. All right. By doing that, now to do the reverse distributive, it's like I'm taking each term and dividing it by 4x to the third. And when I do that, I use my properties of exponents. 4 divided by 4 is 1. X to the fourth divided by x to the third is just x. And then 24x to the third divided by 4x to the third would be 6. So there's my answer there. All right, number 3. Okay, with number 3, we've got 6 and a negative 15. So we want to factor out, and we've got x squared and y. So we're going to actually factor out a 3, okay, because that's the greatest common factor. 6 divided by 3 is 2, so we're left with 2x squared. And 15 divided by 3, or negative 15 divided by 3 is negative 5, and we're left with y. So there's our answer there. Okay, so if you have a coefficient that is negative, a leading coefficient that's negative, make sure you factor out a negative factor, okay? So if I looked at negative 99 and negative 11, I'm actually going to factor out a negative 11. And my w is going to be squared because notice you've got 2 and 3. 2 is the lowest number. So we're going to factor out a negative 11 w squared. Again, when I factor it out, I then can divide both terms to figure out what goes in, kind of your reverse distribute. Negative 99 divided by 11 is 9, and your w squareds would cancel out. And then negative 11 divided by negative 11 w squared would be plus a w. Okay, and it works the same way with 3 terms. We've got 4, 12, and negative 24. In this case, we can factor out a 4. And then look at the variables. We've got n squared, and n to the third. So the lowest would be n to the first, or just 4n. Okay, so then we take each term and we divide by 4n. Okay, reverse distribute. 4n times 1 would give us 4n. 4n times this would be 3n. And then negative 4 divided by 4 is negative 6, and the n would be squared when we divide. Okay. All right, looking at number 6, we've got 9, negative 27, and negative 36. Greatest common factor would be 9, and our p would just be, let's see, to the first power. That's the lowest one. All right, so let's take each of these terms and divide by 9p. Okay, when we do that, we get, we just get p to the fourth, because the 9's cancel out. Negative 27 divided by 9 is negative 3. P, and then we've got negative 36 divided by 9 is negative 4, okay, and your p's would cancel out. Okay, so there's your answer there. All right, number 7, we've got 4, 6, and 12. The greatest common factor would be 2, and c to the 4, c squared, c to the first. Our lowest exponent would just be a c. So we're going to divide all of these by 2c. Okay, when we do that, we get 2c squared. Oh, no, 2c to the third, sorry. Okay, so that's going to be 2c to the third because 4 minus 1 is 3. And then we've got 6 divided by 2 is 3. And we would be left with a c because c squared divided by c is just c. And then 12c divided by 2c would be 6. Okay. Number 8, we get a little bit more complicated because now we have 2 variables. It works the same way. I like to look at the coefficient first, come up with the greatest common factor would be 27, negative 45, and 18. It would be 9. With your a's, you've got a squared, a to the third, so the lowest exponent would just be a to the first. And then for our b variables, we've got b to the fifth, b to the third, and b. So again, our lowest variable would be b. So it's 9ab is what's factored out. And now to figure out what goes inside the parentheses, I'm reverse distributing or dividing by that 9ab. 27 divided by 9 is 3. My a's would cancel out and I would have b to the fourth. Okay, negative 45 divided by 9 is negative 5. A squared divided by a would just be a. And b cubed divided by b would be b to the second power b squared. And then the third one, we've got 18 divided by 9, which would be 2. A cubed divided by a would be a squared, and our b's would cancel out. So there's our answer there. Okay. Number 9, we've got 13 and 39. Greatest common factor of those two would be 13. We've got s and s cubed, so the lowest exponent would just be s. And then we've got w squared and w to the third, so the lowest would be squared. So I'm going to take both of these and divide by 13 sw squared. Okay, when I do that, I get 1 plus 3. My s is going to be squared, And my W is just going to be a W to the first power. And there's my answer. Okay. All right, whoops. So that's how we do that. All right, so now we're going to kind of shift a little bit. We're going to talk about these little puzzles, okay? And these puzzles are going to come in handy when we start factoring, okay? It's getting your brain to kind of think about the numbers. It says in each diagram below, write the two numbers on the sides of the X that are multiplied together to get the top number. So you multiply them, you get the top number, you add them, you get the bottom number. Okay, so in order to do that, you really have to think about your factors and think about them. All right, so if I have 48, and I'm going to not worry about positives or negatives right now. 48, I start off with my factors of 1 times 48, 2 times 24, I've got 3 times 16, I've got 4 times 12, and I've got 6 times 8. Okay, so with those pairs, think of how many, which ones of those would either add up to get 13 or the difference would be 13. Okay, that's usually where I start. I look at, well, in the case of having negative numbers, I like to think of the differences. Okay, so 3, because I know one of them is going to be negative. So the difference between 16 and 3 right here is 13. So that might be a good place to start. 16 and 3. Okay, but when I multiply them, I need to get a negative number. So one of them has to be negative. Let's think about what happens when I add them together. It has to be a negative 13. So the only way that would work is if the negative was with the 16. So negative 16 times 3 is negative 48. Negative 16 plus 3 is negative 13. Okay. Number 2, okay, we've got the number 36. All right, so 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and 6 and 6. Okay, looking at those combinations, are there any where the sum or the difference would be 0? It looks like it would be 6 and 6 right here. Okay, so I know one's going to be negative and one's going to be positive. And that way, negative 6 times 6 is negative 36, and add them together, you get 0. All right, looking at number 3. So with 70, again, I'm going to start looking at my factors. 2 times 35. It's not divisible by 3, not divisible by, let's see, divisible by 4. Nope, 5. Yep. So it's going to be 5, and 5 times 12 is going to be, no, 5 and 14, sorry. 5 times 14 is 70. We've got 6, nope, but we have 7 and 10. Okay, so with those, any sums or difference add up to 9. Well, 5 and 14, the difference is 9, and since one is negative, that might make sense. We've got 5 and 14. In order for it to multiply to get negative 70 and add up to 9, our 5 would be the one that would be negative. Okay. All right. I've got negative 44 and 20, negative 20. So when I list my factors, 144, 222. Well, right here I can tell that the difference between 2 and 22 is actually 20. So I know since one's negative, all right, now I've got to figure out 22 and 2. Well, if I multiply them and get negative 44 to add up to negative 20, it would be the negative 22 that would have to be negative. And that would work. All right, negative 42, okay. Again, you could say 1 and 42, okay, 2 and 21. Then you've got your 3 and 14. Not divisible by 4, but you do know 6 times 7, okay? All right, looking at these ones negative, so our differences, which would have a difference of 1, would be 6 and 7. Okay, in order to make that be a negative 1, the 7 would have to be negative. So 6 times negative 7 is negative 42. Add them together, you get negative 1. Okay. Now, 72. Okay, you can do the same thing, but maybe you'll think 8 times 9 is 72. We want it to be positive, so it's going to have to be a negative 8 and 9. Okay, so you can go ahead and try the next 6 right here. I'd pause the video and then check it. Okay, I'll give you the answers here. All right, so unpause it, and you can see that this should be 25, and actually it's going to be 25 and negative 1. Whoops, it's going to be negative 25 and 1. what did I do here? Hold on. So it's 25 and I think I made a mistake on that one. Let me see. Okay, hold on a second. I think there's a mistake in the key. Okay, so for this one, to multiply to get 24, you're going to have 24 and 1, but they're both going to be negative. Okay, so you got negative 24 and 1. Okay, and that would multiply to get positive 24 and add up to negative 25. All right, number 8, you're going to want 4 times 7 to be 28, adds up to 11. Okay, number 9, you've got 17 and 2. 17 times 2 is 34, and they add up to 19. All right, number 10, we'll get negative 4 and negative 4. And 11 would be negative 18 and 2. And then finally, number 12, we would have 5 times 5 is 25, and they would add up to 10. All right, so I hope that helped. Go ahead and do the homework 52B, and that will give you some practice. Bye.